You're listening to the 49 Carats Podcast, a 49ers Goldmine production with Stephanie Sanchez.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to a special edition of the 49 Carats Podcast. Joining me today, I'm very excited about it, is Tony Pauline, NFL Draft Insider for Sportskeeda. Tony, how you doing, man?
I'm okay. Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And, for anyone who attends any pre-draft event, they've probably seen you there. Shrine Bowl, Senior Bowl, Combine. You got all the pro day scoops. You're everywhere. And before I even knew who you were, I knew you were somebody because, I could tell you've been doing it a long time, because at the Senior Bowl, like I see almost every year, and you kind of just set up shop at the same place. Yep. And you'll have people coming up to you saying hello and how you been. So I'm like, man, this guy knows everyone. And so,
the funny thing is to be honest with you, I just say hello. I don't know the person's name, but if they're nice to me and I'm like, hey, how you doing? Good to see you again. And
fair.
But unless they have a jersey with a name on the back, I'm lost.
Well, the important thing is they know you, right? So clearly there's a reason for that. And so with that, like the first question I have is like, how did you start in this NFL draft space and in scouting in general?
Yeah, good question. I actually trained for the Olympic decathlon for 10 years. I mean, I played a little bit of football in high school, but I was the track and field guy. And really, when you get down to it, scouting football players is as much, or it used to be as much scouting good athletes as it was scouting football players, because what football coaches do is they'll see a guy who's 6'3", 245 pounds, runs the 40 and 4.6, and they say, I'm going to turn him to a good football player. We'll make him a good linebacker, a good pass rusher, a good tight end. And it basically evolved from there. And what happened was, I'll be dating myself a little bit, in the late 80s, I worked with a lot of the reporters in the New York area, the beat writers for the Jets and the Giants, guys like Brian Burwell, who would lean on me for draft information. And then it kind of took off from there. I had conversations with the Miami Dolphins. I had conversations with the New York Giants. And I actually had a conversation with the New York Jets at one time. And Pat Kerwin, who a lot of the people may know that name, was with the New York Jets. And he said, why don't you just go out and do your own thing and take it from there? In fact, I still have the handwritten letter that Pat Kerwin sent me. And that's basically what I did mid-90s or so. And that led into me working with Scout.com and Sports Illustrated, et cetera, and here I am today with you.
Yeah, well, you've been doing a lot of work, and your content shows up on my feed quite a bit, and it's something I've kind of been using.
I'm sorry for that.
No, I mean I think it's great. I've been using it almost religiously for the last couple of years, because I do the draft tracker, 49ers draft tracker. So it's been very helpful for that. But Tony, like this offseason, one of your early reports was, it came after the Shrine Bowl, and you said you were hearing the 49ers were going to prioritize team speed on defense, specifically the secondary, via the draft, free agency, and that they'll be a bit more exotic and add some new wrinkles. So, I mean, with Robert Saleh back, like a lot of that seems obvious, right? Like I think we're ready to kind of have some of that again. But then free agency rolls around, and the 49ers hardly do anything notable. Yep. In fact, like probably the only notable thing was all the guys they lost, and particularly on that defensive line. And a lot of those guys they let walk, right? And I think it really hit home that, okay, like this team is getting younger by any means, and they're ready to bring in some new blood. And so that kind of all puts the pressure on this draft now to retool their defense, add those new wrinkles by way of, new younger personnel. So with that, do you still get the sense that the secondary is something that they'll look to address early, or have you shifted towards defensive line being that bigger need after free agency?
It depends on what you define as early. As we were talking before your show started, I made some calls before this to try and get some preparation. And the belief is the Niners, with that first round pick, are going to look on defensive line. whether it's defensive end, whether it's defensive tackle, as you mentioned, a lot of holes. It came out worse for the wear at free agency. And I asked, who could their pick be at number 11? And I heard from a couple of people, keep an eye on Walter Nolan, the big defensive tackle, the athletic defensive tackle. You want to talk about team speed from Mississippi. Now, a lot of teams have him as a mid-first round choice. And, it's not kind of out of character for the Niners, who take chances in the first round. Ricky Pearsall last year, Trey Lance, I think Javon Kinlaw was probably selected a lot earlier than people thought. So it kind of goes into that character of what they've not afraid to do in the past. You mentioned Robert Saleh, again, Walter Nolan, an athletic defensive lineman, defensive tackle who can rush the passer. Now, you and I were there at the Senior Bowl, and Walter Nolan was not good at the Senior Bowl. I was very excited to see him play, and he just floundered. I mean, he didn't make a lot of plays, but you go the past 2 years, and you look at his film, especially last year at Mississippi, and the guy's a playmaker. The guy penetrates the line of scrimmage. He can rush the passer, tackles for loss. I mean, he really can do it all. He's got to get a little bit bigger. He's got to get a little stronger. There are some off-the-field character questions about him. I've never confirmed it. You want your defensive lineman to be nasty. You don't want, the nice, easygoing guy, but I don't know that it's going to hurt him because I've consistently got mid-first round grades on Walter Nolan. So that's a name to keep an eye on. The other guy who would be a bit surprising is Shamar Stewart. You talk about increasing team speed. You talk about getting an edge rusher. There's a lot of variety of opinions on Shamar Stewart. When they told me Shamar Stewart, I was kind of shocked. And they said he's going to be a top 15 pick. Somebody's going to take him. Yeah. Obviously, the problem with Shamar Stewart is the fact that there's not much production there. 1.5 sacks in 2024, 4.5 sacks his entire college career. And if you read me really through the combine when I was speaking with people as to, how could this guy who's an Olympian-type athlete have so little production? The concern is, well, he can't bend the edge. He can't change direction. And the comparison was made to Vernon Gholston, not Vernon Gholston of Michigan State, Vernon Gholston, who the New York Jets selected as a top 10 pick 10 plus years ago and was a complete bust. But, again, a guy like Robert Saleh, team sees a big athletic guy who's incredibly fast, and they feel they can teach him, they can coach him to be a good pass rusher. So those were the two names I was hearing as far as the first round's concerned with the San Francisco 49ers.
Well, I can't say I'm surprised by, the positions, defensive tackle, edge, definitely big needs for them. But I am a little surprised that they would take, in my mind, a bit of a risk. I mean, you talk about it, the character concerns with Walter Nolan, which, could be something, could be nothing. But I have seen a lot of teams, or I've seen a lot of people in these mock drafts have Nolan a little bit later because of those. So that's probably due to some things they're hearing, probably due to things they're hearing from teams about how they feel about Nolan. So, I kind of see that as a bit of a risk there. And then on Shamar Stewart, I mean, you mentioned it, the lack of production, that's the obvious concern with him. And so to me, while it's a position of need that they'd be targeting there, for a draft that's so important for this defense going forward, those feel like some, big risks for me there, and one that they don't necessarily need to take, in my opinion. So those would definitely be interesting. I know Michael Williams is another option for them that would certainly improve their run game, something that was awful last season. So he's someone they're bringing in for a 30 visit. I can see that being an option, but he may go in the top 10 as well. Yep. Maybe, the Falcons, maybe to the Saints. But those names are intriguing. I have been hearing, some of the 49ers beat writers mention Walter Nolan quite a bit, a little bit more as of late. So I could definitely see there being something to that. Now, I also want to ask you about cornerbacks, because I've been seeing a lot of mock drafts, from the national media guys, and a lot of them, almost all of them, are mocking a cornerback, whether it's Will Johnson or Jahdae Barron, to the 49ers at 11. So I wonder if you've heard anything about the 49ers being linked to a cornerback that early, either the first or the second round, and if they may actually go that route.
I have not. I think I like Will Johnson. I like Barron, but I think 11 is a little too early. Then again, 11 is probably too early for Walter Nolan, and that's what I'm hearing. The only cornerback that I have heard, with the San Francisco 49ers is Dorian Strong of Virginia Tech in day 2, whether that means early 3rd round. But they seem to like Dorian Strong, 6'1", 185 pounds, runs in the mid 4.4s. I like Strong a lot too. He's a big press cover guy, which Robert Saleh is going to like. He's got some versatility. He's got some solid ball skills. I've not heard anything about Johnson or Barron in round 1. I have heard Dorian Strong in day 2.
Okay, that's also like kind of what I'm thinking. I think day 2 is that sweet spot for a corner. They're bringing in Kobe Bryant for a 30 visit. Quincy Riley, they've met with. Zoff Frazier is someone you reported. The 49ers brought a scout to the UTSA Pro Day specifically for him. So there's some interest there. I also heard at the Senior Bowl, Darian Porter and Trey Amos are 2 guys that they were interested in. So, I mean, I definitely feel like it's most likely day 2. They probably go for a corner. But let's shift back to pick 11 for a bit here. With it being the first pick outside of the top 10, it makes trying to predict what happens in the top 10 so important for us to try to figure out what the 49ers are going to do. But the problem is it feels like it's hard to predict what's going to go on in the top 10. I feel like we can lock in the first 3 picks. Hunter Abdul will be 2, 3 in either order. But from there, it can go a number of different ways. And I think the best case scenario for the 49ers is if we see more quarterbacks go in the top 10, right? Which is certainly a possibility. I mean, looking at the list of teams picking it within the top 10, and this is not a mock draft that I have here. This is just a projection of what could happen and what could possibly be a best case scenario for the 49ers. So I have Cam Ward 1, Abdul Carter, even Travis Hunter could go 2. Giants is maybe the first question mark, right? Like they can kind of turn the draft on its head rather early. And I think a lot of people were assuming they would maybe go, Shador. I think there's questions around that now. Now they're bringing him in for, another workout. So I find that interesting. They're also bringing in other quarterbacks for visits, right? So they're doing their homework and due diligence on quarterbacks that I think now makes 3 more interesting than maybe it was, a month or so ago. So that's one for me. And then, the other kind of question mark is pick 8, because everyone's asking, what are the Saints going to do at 9? Now with this news of Derek Carr, his season could be in jeopardy, right? So I think 8 is one of those spots where a quarterback needy team could look to trade up ahead of the Saints with the Panthers. And of course, Panthers GM earlier today said he'd be open to trading that pick. So how do you think these kind of play out between, the Giants, Panthers, and Saints?
Well, I don't think it's going to be that difficult. You may not know the order, but I think we basically know most of the players who are going to go into the top 10. As far as the Giants are concerned, I do a lot of work with the Giants. I would be shocked if the Giants take a quarterback with the 3rd pick of the draft. And the reason is very simply this. Their head coach, Brian Dable, and their general manager, Joe Schoen, are on a very short leash. If they don't need to win in 2025, they need to play ultra competitive football. And drafting Shedeur Sanders with the 3rd pick of the draft just isn't going to do that, as opposed to taking either Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, whichever one is available. They need to get a player with that 3rd pick that is going to be on the field week 1 and produce, because their jobs are at stake. Number 9, New Orleans, again, you mentioned the situation with Derek Carr. We don't know what the final analysis is. But I think if I'm the Saints, and I haven't heard anything as of yet because it's kind of fresh, are you going to take a quarterback at 9? Is taking Shedeur Sanders or Jackson Dart at 9 really going to improve your outlook for 2025? Because in my opinion, and the opinion of most NFL people, those guys are not NFL ready as, say, compared to a Cam Ward, who's probably going to be put on the field in week 1, and you expect things from him. Shedeur Sanders is falling down draft boards. There's a couple of reasons why. I mean, he probably was overrated to begin with. He doesn't have a great arm. Fundamentally, he's very flawed. Some things that can be tough to coach out of him, throwing with proper footwork, not running in reverse when he's being pressured. Sometimes he puts the ball up for grabs. He's a solid prospect. He doesn't deserve to be a very early pick. Jackson Dart, you don't know what you're getting from that Lane Kiffin offense. We've seen talented quarterbacks come out in the past, and they've gone nowhere with from the Lane Kiffin offense. But as we know, quarterbacks are always overdrafted. I do think you're going to get Cam Ward, Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, Will Campbell, Mason Graham, Ashton Genty, Armand Membo, either Mikael Williams or Jalen Walker, some form of that in the top 10. It could be a quarterback. It could be Tyler Warren. We don't know yet what the order is going to be. I would be shocked if more than one quarterback or more than two quarterbacks end up in the top 10.
Now, we recently heard that Jaylen Milro got an invite to attend the draft in Green Bay, and he's going to be there. He accepted the invite. Are you surprised by that at all? Like, where do you kind of see him falling? Is first round really a possibility for him?
Well, it is, and I shouldn't be surprised because I was a huge Jaylen Milro supporter before the season. I had went on record and said I thought that Jaylen Milro, if he had the season he was capable of and the season I expected him to have, could make a Jaden Daniels type ascent up draft boards. Obviously, it never happened. But, I wrote an article last week about this Jaylen Milro going in the first round, and somebody said, look, if Anthony Richardson can be the fourth pick of the draft, Jaylen Milro could be a first-round pick. And when you look at Jaylen Milro, from a physical traits point of view, he's the total package. I mean, his arm strength is as good, if not better, than any quarterback in this draft. His athleticism is as good, if not better. He runs on design quarterback runs or when he's scrambling away from defenders, he runs the ball like many of the running backs in this draft. He's a high character guy. People in Alabama speak incredibly highly of him. They love him. He's a real leader on the football field. Consistency's been an issue. I mean, he was good during the first half of the season, and I was all happy because I was going to look like a genius. And then after that Georgia game, it kind of went downhill for him, where he looked like he was relying more on his feet to make plays rather than his arm. He was not good at the Senior Bowl, as we both saw. Very disappointing. Not good at the Combine. But again, scouts and decision makers will look at what a guy does or what a guy can do, and they will, as opposed to what he can't do. And they will take it from there. And really, there's not too much Jaylen Milro can't do. It's just a matter of getting his confidence back, getting him to do it on a consistent basis. I can see Jaylen Milro definitely being a late first-round pick. I think whether he succeeds or not on Sunday will be determined, as the situation is with a lot of quarterbacks. He's got to have a good coach, a good quarterback coach. You got to be patient with him. You got to develop him, and you could hit a home run at that spot with Milro.
All right. Well, great for him if he's going to have that chance to be a first-round guy. Unfortunately, it doesn't help the 49ers, though, so I frankly don't care. But for the most part, Tony, there's a lot of talk about teams not being interested in trading back as they have been in previous years. And that's because there isn't much of a change in value or a change in talent from pick 10 to pick 20 or so. Would you be shocked to see the 49ers trade up or back in this draft?
Well, I mean, they haven't been shy about trading in the past. I guess I'd be more shocked to see them trade up than trade back, because if you're looking at defensive tackle, even edge rusher, when you get out of those top guys, the top guys being Abdul Carter, Mason Graham, Mikael Williams, Jalen Walker, depending on how you have them ranked, it kind of falls off a cliff as far as the top prospects are concerned. So, and I think those prospects are really going to be spoken for by the team selecting in the top 10. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them attempt to. Now you got to have two to tangle. Attempt to trade back, because once you get into the middle part of round one, you're going to have edge rushers who justifiably should go there. James Pierce and Michael Green, players like that. You'll have a Derek Harmon, defensive tackles. Charles Grant from Michigan. Those guys you can justify taking in the middle, bottom half of round one. Trading up, I don't know, because you trade up, you're going to have to give away draft capital, which means it's a deed that you're not going to be able to address later on in the draft.
Yeah, and that's very much true. And, we're talking about all the needs the 49ers have, but they have 11 picks. So, I mean, I feel like they do have some ammo to move around if they want to. Let's just say, hypothetically, if they did trade up, and let's just say there was a willing team that wanted to trade back, who do you think would be that slam dunk player for the 49ers that they would have to get with a trade up?
I could see maybe a trade moving in front of the Carolina Panthers. I'm looking at my mock here. If Armand Membo is not there at 7, I could see the Jets trying to trade down, and then maybe the Niners moving up to get a Mikael Williams, maybe a Jalen Walker. Although I think Mikael Williams is a better fit for their system. I don't think Mason Graham is going to slide past Jaguars. If he slides past the Jaguars, probably not going to get past the Raiders. So I think looking at the board now, short of Abdul Carter falling because of bad medicals on his foot, which I don't think is going to happen, I think if they trade up, it could be for a guy like Mikael Williams, who a lot of teams like.
Okay. Yeah. And I feel like a month or two ago, there was a lot of talk about, one or two of those top 10 guys possibly falling. Like, I know Will Campbell, there was some talk of that with the arm discussion. I believe like early on in the offseason, you might have even mentioned Mason Graham is one of those guys. But, now I kind of feel like that's kind of out the window. Like all these guys in the top 10 are pretty much, like you said, almost set in stone to go in the top 10. So you don't see any of those guys really falling, right?
I would be surprised. I mean, people have said that if New England Patriots are going to pull a shocker, it would be for an edge rusher, which means one of the tackles could fall. Will Campbell could fall. A lot of people believe that Armand Membo is going to be the first offensive lineman off the board. Again, Will Campbell possibly could fall. I think the issues with Will Campbell go a little bit further than the short arms. If you watched him in the first half of the season, he really wasn't playing tough physical football. In fact, he looked very soft at times. And I guess maybe you heard my week in, week out criticisms on the draft season show I do with the New York Giants, because he kind of kicked it into gear second half of the season. So I think which is the exact opposite of Armand Membo, who always wants to bury the opponent into the ground. Yeah. I would be surprised if it is because a team maybe like the Patriots pull a surprise that no one is foreseeing.
Okay. All right. So Tony, like, as I mentioned before, like I started consuming your draft content, like when I started doing my draft tracker in 2023, and you've had a number of different 49ers scoops throughout, that time. The most memorable one to me was last season, Isaac Guerendo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got your hand slapped just a bit, but you were like the only one that had that. Like, I don't think anyone was really talking about Guerendo as much as you did. You had a couple things on him. I think you said that they had a 3rd round grade on him. That was probably the one that got you in trouble, right? Like, given the grade on him maybe was a bit much, but you also said that they met with him at the Combine, the Shrine Bowl, like you were all over it. And so the one prospect this year that kind of feels similar to that, tell me if I'm right on this, is UCLA's Femi Oladejo.
Yeah.
At least for me.
Yeah, I would agree. The question with Femi is, and he's a terrific prospect, and I've reported, as you're pointing out, that the Niners really liked him a lot. The question is, what do they do in the first round, and do they think he's worth that pick at the top of round 2? I mean, he's a terrific player. He's a terrific person. He's a smart guy. He's an athletic edge rusher. We watched them at the Senior Bowl. They lined him up outside. They would line him up inside. And all he did was make play after play after play. I went out to dinner with him one night. He's an interesting guy. He's one of those people, you'll say something and he wants to know why. He wants to delve into why you feel a certain way. And one of the more interesting things, and I've told the story a couple of times, is when we were leaving the restaurant, I had to drive back to the Players Hotel. He was going up to every scout and every team that interviewed him to say hello and to talk with them. And I was like, wow, this guy is incredibly observant. He started at Cal, so he's got to be pretty smart. And the fact that he was a former inside linebacker who just moved to outside or edge rusher this year. Tells you about the guy's upside. So that is the way I felt early on about him. I mean, I guess the question for the Niners is, do they think he's worth that an early second round pick? Do they think he's around for them in the third round? I don't think the latter is going to happen. I think he's going to be at the very least a late second round choice. But could they roll the dice on him in round two and hope that they get a lot in return?
And they have 2/3. So, I mean, if they really like him, the 49ers aren't afraid to move up for a guy they really like. But that is kind of what I'm afraid of, too, because I think early on in the process, and yeah, I got to talk to him at the Senior Bowl, too, super high confident guy. Like, I just love his energy. And he told me he did meet with the 49ers twice. Of course, he was getting coached by KJ Wright that week, too. So the connections were there. Also has been coached by Ken Norton Jr. So a lot of connections to the 49ers. Also had a formal meeting with them at the Combine. You mentioned they're high on him. But also, I just felt like all the reports about him just started to flood in about other teams being interested in him, too, after that. Like, I started hearing the Commanders being interested in him, which, obviously Adam Peters, 49ers probably have some of the same interests in some of these guys. So it would make sense for the Commanders to pick him up and probably be willing to do that a little bit earlier than the 49ers would. So they might lose out on him, but yeah, I would not be surprised at all also if they got aggressive and went out to get him. So,
well, you would mention the earlier the quarterbacks go, the better it is for the Niners. I think the earlier the edge rushers go, the better it is for Femi Oladejo. So, if the edge rushers start, if there's a run on starting in the middle of round one, I think that's going to push him up, and he'll be selected earlier in the draft just because of the need at the position.
Yeah, definitely. And with that, I mean, we hear everything about what's said about this defensive tackle class, it being as deep as it is. Do you kind of see that some talent could get pushed down just because teams know how deep of a position it is and they could be more willing to wait?
Well, I think it could. I think it will get pushed down, not because they're willing to wait, but because maybe there's a run on running backs. There's a run on edge rushers, as I said, maybe a run on tight ends. But yeah, it is a deep defensive tackle class. And there's a large variety of defensive tackles that are there. One gappers, two gappers, big bodied space eaters. But I think that, my belief is, and when I talk to teams, if there's a defensive tackle there that's high on your board and you like him a lot and he's highly rated, you're not going to say, listen, we're not going to take this guy. We'll get another good defensive tackle later. We're going to take the tight end, or we're going to take the receiver because the receiver's a thin class, or center because it's a thin class, because, you may come around a round or two later and that player that you hope would be there is no longer available.
Right. So another position that, to me is a bit underrated in this class and just not as deep as linebacker. I think there's some, really good linebackers that, the more you dive into some of these guys, the more you're like intrigued by them. And, but they're not getting that amount of love that some of the other positions are getting. And so I do think the 49ers are going to go for a linebacker in this draft. Obviously, with the somewhat unexpected departure of Dre Greenlaw, that's heavy on their list. I gotta believe it's high on their list. One of the 30 visits that they're going to have is Chris Paul Jr., who gets compared to Dre Greenlaw a lot. So I think that one would make a lot of sense. Is there anyone else from the linebacker group that you think would make a lot of sense for the 49ers? And also want to ask you about Jeffrey Bassa, because at Oregon's Pro Day, everyone saw the Tariq Ahmad and John Lynch speaking to him, and everyone thought, oh, that's why they're there. Is there something to that?
Yeah, obviously they made the trip up there. Plus, I mean, the thing about, I'm sure the Niners were there to speak to Jeffrey Bassa, but they're also there to speak to Derek Harmon because and maybe Birch, because there was so much talent on that Oregon team, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, the Niners could just draft from that team and from that program and fill a lot of holes with talented players. So obviously, they're going to spend time with guys. I do like Bossa. Getting back to your question, Demetrius Knight of South Carolina. I mean, smaller, explosive guy, fast, nasty. I mean, just plays with a violent attitude, sideline to sideline, can also cover 6'1.5", so he may struggle going up against those taller tight ends. But that type of mentality that you want on the field. Cody Simon of Ohio State, again, very athletic. Kind of got lost in the shuffle there at Ohio State with so much guys like Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau. But if there was a guy that was consistent week in, week out, defending the run against the pass, it would be Cody Simon. You're looking at him as a third-round pick. Nick Martin, a smaller guy, but again, you want to talk about a guy that plays lights out, a guy that plays with a violent attitude, and a guy that can also play in space. Nick Martin is a guy, late third, maybe early fourth-round pick. I think Jamin Dumas-Johnson from Kentucky by way of Georgia is a guy that fits that sort of Niners mold, the type of player that now Robert Saleh likes. I mean, he's a lot like C.J. Mosley, who Saleh had tremendous success with at the Jets. The Jets just released him. Sort of that nasty run defender. Not so much, he's not great in pass coverage, but he's not a huge liability. They'll be able to get a good player because, as you said, I mean, the off-ball linebacker spot is, and you just call it linebacker. I still call it inside linebacker, outside linebacker, is so devalued and so much of an afterthought in the league this year. You're going to be able to get a good player in the third round, really through the middle rounds at that position if you're targeting one.
Yeah, and I think, some of those guys you mentioned I haven't watched yet, so definitely, going to be putting those guys on my list. But a few I have, and one of the things that I like about 49ers linebackers, what they typically like to go for, guys that play with their hair on fire. I mean, To me, that was Drake Greenlaw. To me, Fred's like that. Bossa, I don't see that from Bossa a whole lot. I think he's a little more calculated. Which is good, just, different from what the 49ers typically look for. I've seen Kobe King, I see as someone maybe being a late round option. What do you think about Teddy Buchanan? Because the 49ers brought him in at their local pro day, obviously, him playing at Cal, and there's some connections there as well. I heard, he was talking to Patrick Willis at the local pro day, actually, so which I thought was interesting. What do you think about him potentially being a late round option for the 49ers?
Yeah, I think he's going to be a mid-day 3 option. Great story. I mean, came into the season great as a street free agent by scouts. But if you watch the Cal film, all he did was make plays sideline to sideline against coverage. He's one of those guys that you talk about, plays with his hair on fire, 6'2", 233 pounds, time to 4.6 at the combine, but plays to that speed, if not faster. So I think he'd be a great option or a great consideration, when you get into the later rounds, 5th round, 6th round areas when I expect him to come off the board. Really a 3-down linebacker. Stats well against the run, even though he's 233 pounds. He's not a liability in coverage, and a guy that's got a good amount of upside. I think he's just hitting his stride as a football player.
Yeah, he'd definitely be an intriguing option, I think, for the 49ers. Now, one last thing about the Oregon Pro Day and just the Oregon players in general. I want to talk about Derek Harmon because he is someone that I think just feels like a pick that would make so much sense. It's almost too much sense for the 49ers. Like, they've gone to Oregon before for some of their defensive linemen with success, Armstead, Buckner. So I kind of feel like Harmon's from that similar mold too, right? Just slightly undersized defensive tackle who can, be versatile for you. But there hasn't been a lot of reports on the 49ers and Derek Harmon, aside from, the large contingent they had at the Oregon Pro Day. Like, is there anything about the 49ers' interest in him other than it being so obvious?
Oh, which probably there's not been a lot of reporting, which probably means he's going to be the pick, right? I have not heard anything, like I said, before the show, the calls I made, the people I talked to pointed to Walter Nolan. I really haven't heard much about Harmon and the Niners. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Just means that I haven't heard anything, in the past couple of days.
Well, I will say this, like earlier, we were talking about the 49ers not being adverse to taking a bit of a risk, or, I forget the word you used, but the first word that came to my mind was reaching for players. Like they sometimes reach for players, and it hasn't always worked out for them, especially for the defensive line picks. But I could see them reaching for Derek Harmon. He's seen more as like a, mid first guy, but if that's the guy they like the most, I could see them going with him at 11. If, they have any concerns about Walter Nolan and those, character questions that we have. But yeah, I mean, I would not be surprised at all, especially like you said, we're not hearing a lot about that. So I could definitely see that being an option. Now, Mike Green's another player that I think could be an option for them at 11 if they elect to go edge. Also not hearing a ton about the 49ers and Mike Green being linked. There's rumors that he had a 30 visit. The beat writers can't confirm it. So is there a reason that if the 49ers are doing their due diligence on him, they wouldn't want people to know?
Only because everyone expects him to be a mid-first round choice. Not too many people expect him to go before Cincinnati. So, I don't see it, only because I don't think if a team finds out the Niners are interested in Mike Green, they're going to jump over him. They're going to trade up in front of him to get Mike Green. The Patriots used to tell the players that they brought in, the agents, if you mention this to anybody, we're not going to draft you, so you better just shut the you-know-what up. I don't think there's any strategy to it. I mean, Mike Green is got some off-the-field issues which have to be answered. I don't think there's anything to that because it's a while ago. He's not been charged. I think we saw him at the Senior Bowl, and he showed himself to be a tremendous edge rusher. My concern with Green at 6'3", 250 pounds is how's he going to hold up against the run, especially if you have him come out of a three-point stance.
Right. Yeah, I think that's fair. Interesting, actually. You don't think that he would go before Cincinnati's pick, so I think that helps kind of give a range for him, and maybe 11 not so much an option for the 49ers. Now, I do want to ask you about Kyle Shanahan and his infatuation with running backs, because come on, we know he's going to get himself another one. They traded Jordan Mason this offseason. The question about Christian McCaffrey and his durability maybe comes into play, but I mean, those are just excuses for Kyle to draft another one. We know he was going to anyway. We haven't heard a lot though about, running backs that the 49ers are potentially interested in so far in this draft. There are a couple names that I think may make sense, or that, 49er fans like Cam Scatterbu. I also think Jadon Blue from Texas would be a good fit. But if you had to guess from this crop of running backs, and there's a lot of great ones, who do you think would make the most sense for the 49ers personally?
I think LaQuint Allen of Syracuse, who's a good interior runner, but is also a sensational pass catcher out of the backfield. Later on, maybe a Brashard Smith of SMU, former receiver, tested off the charts at the combine, ran 4.39 at 195 pounds, still learning the position. So he's a guy that you could get in day 3 and slowly bring him along. You don't need him on the field to begin with. And again, as I said, a former receiver, so he catches the ball well. You've got that athleticism. I think those would be two guys to consider, or two guys to look at.
Yeah, I mean, being able to catch out of the backfield, important, of course, for Kyle. And I feel like, this is a great class to find a back that can do that well, right? One of my personal favorites, RJ Harvey. But again, there's going to be so many good options for the 49ers. You just know they're going to be able to get themselves a good running back in this class. And just final position I'll ask you about here, in terms of the wide receivers. I think, there's also some questions there about, Brandon Ayuk. He's probably not going to be available to start the season. Best case scenario, maybe they're talking about week 1, but I wouldn't count on that, right? So you got this draft in front of you. There's some intriguing names. What's the earliest you think the 49ers would look at getting a wide receiver?
Maybe with one of those multiple third-round picks you talk about, in the 4th round. I think the receiver position really falls off. And if you're looking after the fourth round, guys like Andrew Armstrong of Arkansas, Isaac Tesla of Arkansas, you're looking at number 4. So if you're needing a guy who could step in and play early or produce early, you better grab one in the third round, because the guys on day 3, especially when you get in the middle part of day 3, are developmental guys or number 5 receivers who may develop into 4th receivers at the next level.
Yeah, and maybe the 49ers would be okay with that. I mean, maybe they feel good about Ricky Pearsall taking that next step in year 2. Maybe they feel good about Jawan Jennings, but with Debo leaving as well, I think they're gonna definitely look for another guy there. One of my personal favorites, Kyle Williams.
Yes,
his buzz and his stock I think has risen quite a bit since the Senior Bowl. I feel like a lot of people have come to watch him and see how nice he is. So what are your thoughts on Kyle Williams? And you kind of get the same sense that his stock has risen?
Well, he's going to be one of those guys that I said, if you better use one of those third round picks on him, because I don't think he lasts until the third day. And it's funny you said, people started to, really watch him or really notice him at the Senior Bowl. Well, that's because no one watches Washington State football, right? I mean, they're in the Pac-2 now. But I mean, he's a very polished receiver. He runs good routes, terrific fundamentals. He's fast. He's not a great speedster. He's not a true vertical threat, but an excellent route runner who separates through his routes, fundamentally sound, catches the ball away from his frame, good eye-hand coordination. You look at the Niners offense, and Kyle Williams is round peg, round hole for that offense. It's just a matter of, do you use a third round pick on him, or do you roll the dice and hope he's available in the 4th round? I don't think the latter is going to happen, especially with with a guy like Isaiah Bond, who's probably not going to be drafted after all the off the field issues he has. So that moves Kyle Williams up a peg.
Yeah, that is true. And, just based on traits that I think the 49ers may be looking for in receivers, like I feel like having Debo all those years and, squeezing him for all he was worth. He was great as the wide back role, very specific role. I think after a certain point, teams keyed in on it. It became predictable. And then when he's asked to, run routes, it became very evident. You don't have the amount of separation you really need, especially for a quarterback like Brock Purdy. You want to be able to push the ball a little bit more downfield. So I think they're looking for a separator in a wide receiver in this draft, if they are able to get one. And so who knows? Kyle Williams maybe is that guy. But I lied. I have one more position to ask you about, and it's tight end. This one is the last one, though. So they have a 30 visit. In fact, you were the first to report the first 30 visit for the 49ers, which was Texas Tech tight end Jalen Conyers. And so they also are bringing in Harold Fannin Jr. They brought in Jackson Haas. I think like one of those is not really like the others. I see Haas as being less likely because they added Luke Farrell in free agency, true blocking tight end. Fits the 49ers like hell, but, I just don't know if they really need that. Fannin and Conyers, on the other hand, are more like dynamic pass catchers, and they lined up everywhere for their offenses. And so it's feasible the 49ers maybe turn to more 12 personnel with Ayuk, his availability being in question. But I get the sense that if they get a tight end, they're going to look for more of a pass catching tight end, right?
I mean, I would agree. It's just a matter of, how much do they want the guy to block? If a Joshua Simmons is available to them on day 3, a guy who I absolutely love, he's a terrific downfield pass catcher. He's an outstanding athlete, but you give away a lot in the blocking category. Same thing with Oronde Gadsden. Oronde Gadsden of Syracuse, former receiver, in my opinion, is a 3rd-round prospect that's going to go somewhere in day 3. He's still learning the tight end position. Obviously, he's got good bloodlines. His dad played with the Miami Dolphins for all those years, tested very well. I saw him at the Shrine Bowl at 245 pounds, 20 pounds heavier than his playing weight, and he didn't miss a step. He didn't look like a guy who was playing too heavy. But again, a terrific pass catcher down the field, but you're going to give away a lot as far as blocking is concerned. more of a, if you're looking for sort of a developmental guy, someone that can be your number 3 tight end, Thomas Fidone of Nebraska, 6'4.5", 241 pounds, times 4.7 at the combine, plays a little bit faster, really caught the ball well in that Nebraska offense when it was thrown to him. The problem was he didn't fit the Nebraska offense, and the coach, Matt Rule, was basically telling him, you got to either transfer or you got to enter the draft because you're not going to be in our plans in 2025. He entered the draft. I think he's going to be a hidden gem late or in the middle part of day 3 that is going to be a real good football player 2 or 3 years down the road. And that's maybe something that the Niners would look towards.
Yeah, I think if they take a flyer on a tight end on day 3, he could certainly be an option. Gadsden, Conyers, like there's some intriguing names for sure. Fidone, I think he looked really smooth at the Nebraska Pro Day. I was like, man, like this guy looks legit. And again, late round option. And so, yeah, I think a team's going to be able to get a steal. So there'll be options for the 49ers. Now, again, Tony, thank you so much for joining me on this show today and, spilling all the secrets on what you're hearing with the 49ers draft. We're about, 8 days away from the draft, and we still have no idea who the 49ers are taking, but we have a better idea today, thanks to you. So appreciate your time coming on here and sharing some thoughts.
Thanks for having me, and I will see you in Mobile next year.
Absolutely. Yeah, we always sit around the same section. It's a good section because it's not quite midfield, but close enough. So I will see you there. Appreciate everyone that tuned in. Make sure you like this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. There will be plenty more draft content just like this. But for now, have a good rest of your Tuesday, folks. Peace.